Hey, Clemson family, here comes the Tigers' fourth straight Atlantic Division Challenge, with Syracuse coming to town, and the Orange are outwardly confident even before the team arrives.
I'm Daniel Shirley. It's time to look at some more recruiting, as Clemson had a decommitment, then a recommitment for the 2023 class.
I'm Bill Zimmerman. Welcome to episode 34 of the Reign Supreme Alway podcast. You can find all our episodes at our homepage, www.clemsonkickoff.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Both of those are at Clemson Kickoff. And thanks to those of you checking us out on youtube.com/Clemson Kickoff. Give us a quick subscribe or follow wherever you want to keep posted, because we update twice a week with the podcast and more often on social media. So let's talk Syracuse. And judging by some back and forth you and I had earlier in the week, I think it's a tougher matchup than you do. There's really no solace in the fact for me that the Tigers are by far the best team the Orange have faced this season. It's not even close, because Syracuse has had plenty of games in recent memory where they matched up well against the Tigers.
They have. There's also been some blowout, and I had to remind you of that as we're talking about this. Not every game has been close, but there have been some games, where they beat Clemson. The Friday night game when Kelly Bryant got hurt, we all remember that game. There were close games as well. Everybody's always going to go to the Chase Bryce game. So there's been some close games, but some blowouts. And I'm not trying to diminish what Syracuse has done. They are 6-0. They've beaten everybody in front of them. That's not their fault that Devin Leary didn't play last week. You have to play who's on your schedule and who's available for those teams. But I also think you look at what they've done and who they've beaten. I think there's one quality win. And I take NC State out. I think there's the qualifier with the Devin Leary injury. But Purdue's a good win. Other than that, it's not much on the schedule. There's not much meat on the bone, as they say. So, we'll see what they can do, but I think you have to be impressed with what they've done. If you look at all the hot seat lists that came out before the season, Dino Babers was on all those lists. And here we are, they're already bowl eligible. So it's impressive what they've done, but I think there is an asterisk by some of it a little bit.
Neat that you mentioned Chase Bryce. He had a midweek game this year. He has said on Twitter he's going to be in Death Valley this weekend, so that'll add a little fun. That was a 27-23 game when Clemson won, the year that Bryce came in with Trevor Lawrence getting knocked out. Last year, it was another close one, 17-14. Dino Babers is probably off that hot seat, and he has some mojo against Clemson when his quarterback is decent, and this year's guy is more than decent. That's Garrett Schrader. He is averaging about 238 yards per game passing, according to sportsreference.com. Last week versus NC State, 210 yards on 16 of 25 passing, 2 touchdowns, but also 2 interceptions. And then he tacked on 81 yards rushing. He's a big guy. He's got size, kind of like Uiagalelei has. He's able to rush the ball and rush it physically. True dual threat guy. He comes out of Charlotte and is then a transfer from Mississippi State to get to Syracuse, where he seems to be fitting in really well, and especially with new offensive coordinator Robert Anae.
Who I think is probably the biggest addition to the staff, and probably the most important move that Dino has made in his coaching career, at least at Syracuse, because this offense was a mess last year, but Robert's done a really good job. They're impressive on offense. There's no doubt about that. And you can see what they're trying to do. They're trying to get the ball to their best players, and they're not hiding who that is. They're really not trying to even spread the ball around a whole lot. It's get the ball to their guys and let them go to work. So Clemson's going to have to be ready for those players for sure.
Schrader with some swagger, one of the players who's got some things to say already. One of the quotes was, "I think this is our year to take them down, and there'd be no better way to do it than in Death Valley." Well, I'll bet word of that has not only reached the team, but also the fans. That usually tends to happen. That might make it his 11 against Clemson's 85,000, as the video goes with Ben Boulware, huh?
It could. I hope that would fire up the fans. As far as the players, I mean, what's he going to say? What's he supposed to say, right? I know that people get fired up by trash talk, but, you ask these guys if you're going to win or you're going to lose. What do they? I would hope they would say they're going to win. But for the fans, I would hope that gives the fan base a little bit extra juice for a noon kickoff. Maybe they were going to sleepwalk a little bit for a noon kickoff. Who knows? But if that could fire up the fan base and get those people in the stadium really going and ready for that game, maybe that's a good thing.
Schrader and the Orange offense have been good in the red zone. Another similarity to Clemson. They've scored 26 times out of 28 trips. Plenty of weapons to work with. Sean Tucker, 98 yards against NC State last week. We do know the Wolfpack has a pretty good defense. That didn't change. Tucker averaging 107 yards, so pretty close to his season average there. Last year against Clemson ran for more than 150 yards. Again, that 17-14 close matchup. They also have Aronde Gadsden II. If you're an NFL fan, you might remember him making a name for himself with the Miami Dolphins. Gadsden had 3 straight games of 100 yards receiving. So you mentioned getting the ball around to various players. They are adept at doing that.
They are, and Tucker's a good player. I mean, he really is impressive. I like how they use him. They're making no bones that look, he's our guy. We're going to get him the ball as much as we can. We're going to use him in different ways. And it's impressive how they've been able to do that. And other teams haven't really been able to slow him down. So we'll see how the Tigers defense can fare against him. Let's hope the tackling is a lot better than last week. It better be, or the defense could be in some trouble. So that's going to be a huge part of this game on Saturday afternoon.
You mentioned Purdue. That was a close one for the Orange, 32-29, and a bit of a strange box score, but it showed that the Syracuse Stars can be limited and they can still put points on the board. Schrader was only 13 of 29 passing against Purdue. Still managed 3 touchdowns, though, also managed 83 yards rushing, which they needed, I'll bet, because Tucker was held under 50 yards. There was a pick 6 that helped, but it shows that they can kind of fulfill that cliche of let him hang around and beat you, right? Dabo Swinney says at this point in the season, nobody's undefeated just because they're lucky. And Syracuse's record really reflects a good team. Okay, fine. Yeah, it's low-hanging fruit to just agree with an X and O football evaluation by Swinney. This is no exception. I do think that Syracuse is probably the most talented version of itself that we have seen since that team that really pushed the limits, not only beating Clemson one year, but then nearly beating Clemson in Death Valley the year that Chase Bryce had to come to the rescue.
Look, the talent is there, and I think the coaching staff is better this year as well. But a lot of talk this week from the Orange side and saying some things that maybe Clemson hasn't seen what they can do. Well, they haven't seen what Clemson can do either. At least that's what you're hoping for if you're a Clemson fan. So I think the defense, if the defense is as focused as it should be, and we heard about there was a player meeting this week to talk about some of the issues from last Saturday, see how those things work. We know how player meetings work. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. If this one does work and the defense is focused and ready to go, I believe this group will be able to handle this Syracuse offense and do its job, keep that side of the ball under control, and then let Clemson's offense go to work against Syracuse defense.
One other challenge that Swinney mentioned the defense has to meet against the Syracuse offense is that Syracuse does bring a lot of different looks in the running game, including Schrader's physicality, but they do also a lot of the things well that FSU did well last week. Swinney also recalled that tackling was an issue for Clemson last year against Syracuse, and it's certainly been a problem area for the defense this season overall. But I think that, as I mentioned before the show, as we were just kind of getting ready to go here, that to me, that's the side of the ball that we really have to look at. I think the Clemson offense is not really going to see anything in the Syracuse defense that they haven't seen yet this year. If they can manage to execute like they ought to, they should be fine. It's going to be a question of can Syracuse put up the points to not only keep up with Clemson, but come out ahead. And the fact of the matter is the Syracuse defense has yet to beat a ranked team this year that had its starting quarterback. They've also yet to face a runner like Shipley. So Clemson, for all its challenges, and hasn't been flawless with offense by any stretch of the imagination, but they've been able to come up with enough chunk plays, enough big plays here and there to make sure that they put enough points on the board to come out ahead every week. That'll be the challenge again this week. Can they do it one more time against another talented ACC Atlantic Division opponent for the 4th week in a row?
Isn't that a 180 degrees from where we were going into the season? There were so many concerns about the offense, and you thought the defense was elite and one of the best defenses in the country. Well, the defense hasn't been awful. It has at times. It's been inconsistent. And that is a shock to me, Bill. I really thought this defense had a chance to be one of Clemson's best. And, the linebackers are more athletic and aggressive. Thought the defensive front was going to dominate, and then the secondary would figure things out. And we just have not seen that on a consistent basis. And then on the other side, the offense has been consistent. It really has, and with some outstanding moments at times. But the offense really hasn't had any bad moments outside of maybe the first quarter of the Georgia Tech game to start the season. This offense has been pretty consistent. So that really is, for me, one of the biggest surprises of this season, that the Clemson defense has not been more consistent than it has been.
I think it'll be another close one. I think the Tigers will have trouble covering the spread against Syracuse. I do think they're that good. Sellout crowd for homecoming, should be a loud environment, should be something that this Syracuse team just hasn't run into yet. They've got the burden of the long road trip, the traveling that they have to deal with. Hopefully enough things are stacking in Clemson's favor to come out in what does look to be a close matchup. Well, let's get into one more item here, and it's recruiting again, which not a huge fan of dealing with recruiting during the season, although next week during the bye week, we hope to have an episode dedicated to that. One thing that we do want to get to ahead of that, though, is Zechariah Flapjack Owens, who has recommitted to the Clemson Tigers. He is an offensive lineman out of Georgia.
How weird was this, Bill? I mean, I've asked a couple of writers who I know who cover recruiting, when's the last time Clemson had a decommitment and then a recommitment? And I couldn't think of one, and I didn't get an answer thinking of one, especially this quick. We'll see where this goes. I'm almost kind of surprised they said, okay, come back to the class and be in the class, which was a surprise. But let's see what's next for him. He's a good player. I think he's got some work to do. I don't think he's a come in and be ready to contribute day one kind of a guy. He's probably maybe even a red shirt his first year. So my thing is, I hope they're not done with the offensive line, even with him in the mix. Let's hope they add, an offensive lineman or two before this class wraps up.
Judging by the stories I'm seeing online, decommitted October 13th, recommitted October 18th. So a 5-day window. Hey, he's 18 years old. He's still got a lot of his future ahead of him. Clemson does a lot of homework on the people they recruit, not just the players, and there must be enough background there for the coaching staff to feel like his overall personality comes out ahead of one hiccup on the recruiting trail. Good to see him back in the fold. I do hope they take a fourth offensive line commit. They did make some offers while Owens was decommitted, but I have seen some indications out there that Clemson will now take a fourth offensive lineman. They do have vacancies with Sergio Allen and Dakari Collins already intending to transfer. While they're not offensive linemen, it does open up the numbers for them to take another guy up front in the offensive trenches.
Look, you trust the coaching staff. If they think he's good enough and they're okay with what transpired, I mean, who am I to tell them they made a mistake about a recruit or a commit? I mean, these coaches know what they're doing, and you never doubt what Dabo Swinney and his staff are doing in recruiting. If you do, then you're way off base. But yeah, I want to see as many offensive linemen as possible. I don't think you can ever take too many. They really need to continue to build this offensive line. And Bill, how do we know somebody's not going to transfer out too? I mean, it's probably likely that somebody will. So there probably will be another commit or two in this class on the offensive line. At least this guy's hoping there is.
Not a lot of depth up front for the Tigers. We have seen Mitchell Mays get some extended snaps this year. We know there's a lot of talent, but it's young talent. You'd like to see those numbers increase so that the number of guys who can contribute quickly, like a Blake Miller, go back to like Mitch Hyatt, that it's not the exception to the rule. You're hoping to get more guys who can step in faster, contribute more strongly. We're starting to see Tristan Lee get in there, but we saw Marcus Tate struggle last year and need that learning curve. And now he's been more reliable this year as a result. But it did create some trouble last year when you had guys moving around, changing positions, playing where they weren't familiar, and or being young, as Tate's case was. Nothing against anyone in particular. It just makes it tougher when you have to play that mix and match because your depth isn't where it needs to be.
Knock on wood, this group has been healthy, and that's been a huge part of this 7-0 start. I don't think that can be overstated, just how important the offensive line has been to Clemson's play this season. Last year, they, 7 different starting lineups in the offensive line in 13 games. This year, there's been 1. I mean, that is a stark difference from what we saw last year. And then you look at how the offense has performed. I mean, every game they've scored over 30 points. Remember how hard last year it was just to get into the 20s for the offense? So
Yeah.
This offensive line has been impressive. It's not perfect. It's not great. They're not mauling people, but that's okay. But they are doing the job. They got it done again last week. They got it done at BC and against NC State and Wake. So, we'll see how they continue to play. But I'm with you. I think more depth needs to be built up on the offensive line. They haven't really had a chance maybe to either, Bill, with the way the games have played out. Outside of BC, since we got into ACC play here with the team, the games have been kind of close. So we'll see if maybe there's a larger margin here if that gets some of these guys some more playing time as we move forward.
Welcome back, Flapjack is the motto of the day as far as recruiting goes. And like I said, we do hope to get more into recruiting during the bye week. Some big name visitors coming to Death Valley for this game as well. Daniel, anything else you're going to be looking for this week before kickoff?
No, I'm ready for kickoff. Let's just line up and go at noon and see which orange team is the better team.
Stakes will be high. It's going to be a really interesting game, I think. Well, Clemson family, we are glad you found us. Smash that subscribe button, hit that follow button, stay up to speed every time we react to big news around Clemson athletics, and help us keep this a free podcast. That's what we want to do. Our homepage has great resources, www.clemsonkickoff.com. You can play all our episodes there. Go back to the preseason Syracuse episode. Find out where we were on the mark and where we were way off, because we sure didn't have them 6-0 coming into this. You'll find all our podcast links there as well if you want to catch us on Apple, Amazon, any of the other services. Follow us on Twitter or Instagram at Clemson Kickoff. We retweet news as it happens. We post some fun stuff there as well. Well, until the next episode after the results of that Clemson-Syracuse tilt, I am Bill Zimmerman.
I'm Daniel Shirley. Go Tigers.